Behind the cold steel bars and high concrete walls of the world's prisons lie stories and images that often escape the public's view. These facilities are meant to serve as places of punishment, rehabilitation, and reflection, but the reality within can be a far cry from their intended purpose. These photographs capture moments of agony, despair, and the raw, unfiltered emotions of both inmates and those tasked with their incarceration. In this collection, we delve into the stark, unsettling visuals that serve as stark reminders of the profound challenges within the prison system. Abu Ghraib Prison. The Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq gained international notoriety due to the horrific human rights abuses and war crimes committed against detainees during the early stages of the Iraq War. These abuses included physical abuse, sexual humiliation, both physical and psychological torture, rape, and even the killing of detainees. These incidents shocked the world when photographs of the abuse were published by CBS News in April 2004. The abuses at Abu Ghraib were a clear violation of human rights and international law. Detainees were subjected to degrading and inhumane treatment, which included physical beatings, forced nudity, and the use of leashes on prisoners, as depicted in the infamous photographs. These acts of cruelty were not isolated incidents, but were part of a wider pattern of torture and brutal treatment at various American overseas detention centers, including those in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Guantanamo Bay, as noted by humanitarian organizations such as the Red Cross, Amnesty International, and Human Rights Watch. One of the most disturbing aspects of the Abu Ghraib scandal was the authorization of enhanced interrogation techniques, which were, in essence, a form of torture. Documents known as the torture memos revealed that the U.S. Department of Justice had approved these techniques in the months leading up to the 2003 invasion of Iraq. The memos also argued that international humanitarian laws, including the Geneva Conventions, did not apply to American interrogators overseas. This stance was later overturned by U.S. Supreme Court decisions, affirming the applicability of the Geneva Conventions. In response to the abuses at Abu Ghraib, the U.S. Department of Defense removed several soldiers and officers from duty. 11 soldiers faced charges, including dereliction of duty, maltreatment, and aggravated assault and battery. Many of them were court-martialed, convicted, sentenced to military prison, and dishonorably discharged from service. 2 of the soldiers, Specialist Charles Grainer and PFC Lindy England, received harsher sentences for their roles in the most severe offenses. Grainer was sentenced to 10 years in prison, while England received a 3-year sentence. The commanding officer of all detention facilities in Iraq, Brigadier General Janis Karpinski, was reprimanded and demoted to the rank of colonel, even though many believed that higher-ranking officials were also involved or authorized these actions. The events at Abu Ghraib caused widespread condemnation, both within the United States and internationally. The Bush administration at the time tried to characterize these abuses as isolated incidents, but the evidence suggested otherwise. The scandal undermined efforts to rebuild Iraq and severely damaged the reputation of the United States on the global stage. It serves as a stark reminder of the importance of upholding human rights and international law even in times of conflict and war. In a disturbing photo that came out, we can see a U.S. soldier beating up a prisoner who has been gagged up by some bag and looks unconscious. While these pictures are part of a presentation on how ordinary people can have dark sides, we can really see how bad the condition was in Abu Ghraib prison. The horrors inflicted upon detainees in Abu Ghraib prison are difficult to fathom. The prison, initially used to house approximately 7,490 prisoners, was the site of unspeakable acts of physical and psychological torture. The heinous acts committed by members of the U.S. Army and the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, included physical abuse, sexual humiliation, and even rape. One of the most iconic and disturbing images from Abu Ghraib depicts a detainee crouched in fear while a military dog snarls and lunges, a testament to the intimidation and terror employed as part of the interrogation techniques. Detainees were also subjected to the horrors of stress positions, where they were forced into painful and contorted poses, causing excruciating physical and mental suffering. Sleep deprivation was another tool used to break detainees, with some subjected to prolonged periods without rest, driving them to the brink of insanity. The very essence of their humanity was stripped away, as prisoners were forcibly stripped of their clothing, left exposed and vulnerable in a degrading display of power and cruelty. Sexual humiliation and degradation were pervasive, with forced nudity being a common form of abuse. Detainees were photographed in degrading poses, as their their captors taunted and humiliated them. In one of the most horrific revelations, it was exposed that prisoners had been raped by soldiers and translators, with the evidence captured in shocking images. These acts were accompanied by the use of objects such as truncheons and phosphorescent tubes, adding to the nightmarish landscape of Abu Ghraib. The International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, reported that these abuses were not isolated incidents but part of a broader pattern, representing a severe breach of international law and human rights. The prison became synonymous with acts tantamount to torture, inflicted systematically upon those detained within its walls. The authorization for such brutal practices reached the highest levels of government and military leadership. The revelations of executive orders, military chain of command authorizations, and even the alleged involvement of the U.S. Defense Secretary, Donald Rumsfeld, demonstrated that these acts were not the result of rogue individuals, but rather a deeply troubling and systemic problem. In one of the pictures, we can see two men naked who have been tied together as a part of some sick sexual act forced upon by the enforcers of the prison. In another snap, a bunch of men are naked and on top of each other in weird positions while there is some sort of sexual interaction going on between them, while two U.S. guards stand behind them in a pose almost in pride of their work inside the prison. The revelations of the Abu Ghraib prison scandal in 2004 sent shockwaves through the world. A 2006 study attempted to tally the casualties, shedding light on the grim toll of the abuse. Out of 63 detainee deaths at Abu Ghraib, various causes were identified. Shockingly, 36 of these deaths were attributed to insurgent mortar attacks, a tragic illustration of the vulnerability of the facility. The Geneva Convention explicitly dictates that prisoners should not be held in locations susceptible to artillery attacks. While this concern was raised early on, the decision to continue detaining prisoners at Abu Ghraib exposed them to these risks. It is notable that no other U.S. detention facility in Iraq suffered casualties from mortar attacks, making this a unique and tragic aspect of the Abu Ghraib story. The media's role in bringing these horrors to light cannot be understated. In 2003, the Associated Press published an extensive report on the inhumane treatment, beatings, and deaths at Abu Ghraib, based on interviews with former detainees. It depicted a grim scene where inmates were not just abused, but attacked by dogs, forced to wear hoods, and subjected to various forms of humiliation. Surprisingly, this early report garnered little attention, a testament to the initial lack of interest in the disturbing revelations. The turning point came in late April 2004, when CBS's 60 Minutes 2 broadcast a harrowing story on the abuse, which included graphic photographs. These images, initially delayed by the Department of Defense, shocked the world when they were finally revealed. Brigadier General Mark Kimmett, Deputy Director of Coalition Operations in Iraq, expressed the military's deep remorse, emphasizing that these actions were not representative of the vast majority of soldiers. The New Yorker magazine 2004 provided detailed coverage of the abuses, relying on the Taguba report for substantiation. Seymour M. Hersh's articles painted a disturbing picture of the situation. They revealed not just isolated incidents, but a pattern of systemic abuse. In 2006, Australian television network SBS aired previously unreleased photos and videos. The Bush administration tried to prevent their publication in the U.S., fearing the outrage they might incite. These newly released images depicted prisoners subjected to unspeakable horrors, further exposing the extent of the abuse within the prison. Some images were truly gruesome, showing prisoners killed by their captors. The international response to these revelations was immense. Archbishop Giovanni Laholo, the foreign minister of the Holy See, stated that the Abu Ghraib scandal was a more significant blow to the United States than the 9/11 attacks, with the distinction that this blow was self-inflicted. The repercussions extended beyond the United States, affecting American reputation and policies worldwide. Scholarly analysis of the Abu Ghraib scandal has focused on the broader context. Academics have argued that the pressure to prevent further terror attacks led the U.S. administration to adopt aggressive measures in the war on terror. They contend that this pressure, combined with the nature of the perceived enemies and threats, contributed to the abuses at Abu Ghraib. Feminist scholars have explored the role of masculinity and race in the abuse, with some suggesting that the sexual humiliation of detainees was meant to assert American cultural supremacy over Iraqi masculinities. This underlines the complex factors that played a part in the unspeakable acts committed at Abu Ghraib, shedding light on the deeper cultural and psychological dimensions of the scandal. The Abu Ghraib prisoner abuse scandal stands as one of the most egregious incidents during the Iraq War. It unfolded within the walls of the Abu Ghraib prison, a facility notorious for its harsh conditions and poor treatment of detainees. The abuse was perpetrated by U.S. military personnel and contractors tasked with guarding and interrogating prisoners. Detainees of various backgrounds, including suspected insurgents and common criminals, became became victims of physical and psychological mistreatment, humiliation, sexual abuse, and torture. The scandal was thrust into the international spotlight in 2003 when disturbing photographs that depicted the abuse were leaked to the media. These images were deeply shocking, and their publication sparked outrage and condemnation worldwide. The images, some of which showed detainees piled in naked human pyramids or hooded and attached to wires, led to widespread public revulsion. The legal aftermath of the scandal saw a series of convictions, but the punishments varied widely. Most of the convictions included the charge of dereliction of duty, although the acts themselves went far beyond negligence or incompetence. Soldiers involved in the abuse received sentences for offenses such as assault, indecency, conspiracy to maltreat detainees, and cruelty, among others. However, it's crucial to note that no one was convicted for the murders of the detainees. Despite evidence of severe mistreatment and deaths, some key figures involved faced disciplinary actions and punishments of varying severity. Colonel Thomas Pappas, for instance, was relieved of his command and received non-judicial punishment. Lieutenant Colonel Stephen L. Jordan had some charges dismissed and was ultimately acquitted. Specialist Charles Grainer, who appeared in many of the shocking photographs, received a 10-year prison sentence and a dishonorable discharge. The Abu Ghraib scandal raised significant concerns regarding the violation of international laws and conventions. Under Common Article 2 of the Geneva Conventions, the situation was deemed to fall under the purview of international humanitarian law, as the United States occupied Iraq under the Coalition Provisional Authority, CPA. Additionally, the scandal called into question the United Nations Convention Against Torture and other international agreements to which the U.S. was a party. While there were legal actions taken against some of those involved, including universal jurisdiction cases in Germany and a U.S. grand jury investigation into CIA torture, the full extent of accountability remained a subject of debate and concern. The incident highlighted the need for clarity and adherence to international legal norms in the treatment of detainees during wartime and the necessity of robust mechanisms to ensure that those responsible for abuse are held accountable for their actions. The Abu Ghraib scandal continues to serve as a stark reminder of the complexities and challenges inherent in maintaining the rule of law during times of armed conflict. St. Clair Correctional Center. The shocking and distressing images from within the walls of St. Clair Correctional Facility in Springville, Alabama, paint a harrowing picture of the horrors that have unfolded in this prison. The photographs are not scenes from a battlefield, but rather from a place where men, many of them incarcerated for years, fight a different kind of battle, one for their very survival. In these gruesome photos, one can witness a trail of blood, mangled bodies, and makeshift triage attempts. Men, living in conditions that might be described as hellish torture, are shown as victims of a system that has failed them. While it is important to emphasize that not all inmates engage in violence, it is evident that St. Clair Prison has become a breeding ground for brutality, marked by rape, stabbings, murder, and extortion. The images depict the aftermath of gruesome and life-threatening inmate-on-inmate violence. The concerned officer who sent these photographs is raising the alarm about the terrifying environment within the prison. The facility is under a federal settlement agreement following a lawsuit by the Equal Justice Initiative and the Southern Poverty Law Center, yet the officer claims that this agreement does little to make the prison a safer place. In fact, the daily treatment of the men incarcerated in this facility only seems to deepen their anger and despair. What these images reveal is that St. Clair Correctional Facility is far from a place of rehabilitation or even basic human decency. Instead, it appears to be a chamber of horrors where the state has failed to protect the well-being and safety of those in its care. These photographs, while deeply disturbing, offer an unprecedented glimpse into a prison system that has become lethal and inhumane. The situation reflects not just conditions in one prison, but a broader crisis within the American criminal justice system, where incarceration often becomes synonymous with torment, violence, and despair. It is a stark reminder of the urgent need for reform, rehabilitation, and greater oversight of correctional facilities to ensure that such horrors are never allowed to persist. Victor Russo's grim tale offers a chilling glimpse into the nightmarish world within Alabama's prisons. After serving 32 years behind bars, Russo, a man initially convicted of robbery and murder, managed to steer clear of violence until recently. The shocking truth is that violence within these prisons, particularly prisoner-on-prisoner incidents, has reached disturbing levels over the past few years. Despite nearly losing his life twice in brutal stabbings, Russo, like many others, faces a constant threat from violent, unchecked inmates. The situation took a dark turn for Russo in 2013 when he was issued a citation for failing to shave with a razor at St. Clair Correctional Facility. Despite having a legitimate reason prison for maintaining some facial hair, the consequences of this citation proved disastrous. The subsequent loss of his housing assignment in the prison's honor dorm, one of the safest places in Alabama Department of Corrections, ADOC facilities, was followed by a horrific ordeal in general population. Russo fell victim to a robbery by 3 prisoners wielding knives, possibly under the influence of methamphetamines. When Russo sought help from correctional staff, he was shockingly advised to obtain a weapon for self-defense. Afraid to identify his attackers, Russo was subsequently sent to administrative segregation, essentially for his own protection. While in segregation, Russo eventually identified his assailants. However, his safety remained in jeopardy as the system failed to keep him adequately protected. His lawsuit highlights a pattern of misplaced disciplinary actions taken by ADOC against victims of assaults. Instead of addressing the abuse, ADOC often focuses on the victim's past misconduct, discouraging prisoners from reporting violence and thus missing an opportunity to prevent it. Russo's ordeal continued with gang members coercing him into falsifying a story to get sent to segregation. His compliance was an attempt to ensure that a rival, Blood T, would remain in segregation as well, adhering to prison rules that mandate the separation of enemies. Even when Russo sought the assistance of prison staff to have Blood T removed from his enemies list, his pleas went unheeded. The viciousness culminated in a savage attack in April 2016, where Russo was stabbed 16 times by alleged gang members who held him in a chokehold. Their gruesome message was clear: comply with their demand to return to segregation, allowing Blood T to be released, or face the consequence of their violence. Victor Russo's traumatic experiences are not unique. The shocking photographs we've received paint a chilling picture of violence in real time, capturing the anguish and brutality that unfold within these prison walls. These images are, in essence, crime scenes that chronicle the brutality of life behind bars. The stories of men bleeding out on examination tables, prisoners strangled or beaten in their beds, and grim suicides are haunting reminders of a prison system that has been described by a federal judge as having horrendously inadequate mental health care. The recent reports of deaths within Alabama's St. Clair Correctional Facility serve as grim reminders of the ongoing crisis in the state's prison system. Terrence Guyton, a 56-year-old inmate, tragically lost his life in the early hours of May 31st, succumbing to a brutal assault within his cell. It is reported that Mr. Guyton was not only beaten, but also choked to death, and evidence from the coroner's examination documented at least 1 stab wound on his body, coupled with extensive bruising on his face. This horrific incident follows the death of Jamal McCain, a 37-year-old inmate who was fatally stabbed in his cell at the same facility on May 15th. In addition to these alarming cases of violence, Stephen Say, a 34-year-old inmate, reportedly died by suicide while in solitary confinement at St. Clair. Mr. Say, who was on mental health watch, had been moved from a crisis cell where he was supposed to be closely monitored, making his suicide all the more disturbing. The Justice Department had sued Alabama in 2020, revealing a deeply troubling pattern of life-threatening violence within the state's prisons. Issues such as the flow of dangerous contraband, inadequate supervision, and staff indifference to the risk of harm exacerbated this crisis. Despite the ongoing lawsuit, it is evident that conditions within St. Clair Correctional Facility have not improved. Instead, the alarming trend of fatal violence and mortality within Alabama's prisons continues to rise to record-high levels. In 2022, a staggering 274 people lost their lives in Alabama's prisons, marking the highest number of prison deaths in a calendar year for the state. Tragically, at least 19 of these deaths were classified as homicides. Astonishingly, nearly 1 in 3 deaths, 85 out of 274, within Alabama's prisons in 2022 resulted from homicide, suicide, or fatal drug overdose. This rate is 7 times higher than the most recently reported rate for the state as a whole. Despite the undeniable crisis within its prison system, Alabama state officials have yet to announce any comprehensive plans to address and reduce the alarming rate of deaths in custody. These tragic events underscore the urgent need for meaningful reform, increased oversight, and a reevaluation of the state's approach to incarceration and prisoner welfare. It is a stark reminder of the ongoing human rights crisis within the Alabama prison system. A distressing wave of inmate-on-inmate assaults occurred at the St. Clair County Correctional Facility in Alabama over a 2-day period earlier this week. While exact details are still emerging, at least 5 individuals were either victims or involved in these violent incidents, raising grave concerns about the safety and security within the prison. The victims of these inmate-on-inmate assaults include Bienemy Luther, Martin Adams, Montrell Towns, Ladarius Lucas, and Shedrick Williams III, all of whom were subjected to violence within the facility. This unsettling series of attacks led to Luther and Lucas being transported to area hospitals for necessary treatment and further assessment. Thankfully, there have been no reported fatalities as a result of these incidents. The first assault occurred on Monday when Luther Luther was attacked by another inmate and subsequently received treatment within the prison's healthcare unit. Due to the severe nature of his injuries, Luther was then transferred to an area hospital for more extensive medical attention. The following day, on Tuesday, Adams, Towns, and Lucas were involved in a physical altercation with weapons. Adams was treated on site, while Lucas required transportation to a local hospital for further assessment. On the same day, Williams was also attacked with a weapon by a group of inmates, but received on-site treatment for his injuries. It's important to note that the St. Clair County Correctional Facility is designed as a close security establishment, but is currently housing more incarcerated individuals than its intended capacity allows. The chronic overcrowding in such facilities significantly contributes to the heightened tension and risks faced by inmates. Furthermore, reports indicate that multiple inmate-on-inmate assaults have occurred at St. Clair County Correctional Facility in October alone, suggesting a concerning pattern of violence. The Alabama Department of Corrections, ADOC, has yet to provide a monthly report on the number of deaths within the facility. Alarmingly, at least 10 individuals have lost their lives in the prison since September of the current year. The U.S. Justice Department, in an ongoing lawsuit with the ADOC and the state of Alabama, has asserted that the chronic understaffing of correctional guards within the prison system has directly contributed to increased incidents of violence and fatalities among the incarcerated population. These recent events underscore the urgent need for reforms and heightened scrutiny of Alabama's prison system to protect the welfare and lives of those in custody. Soviet Gulag prisons. The Soviet gulags, established after the Bolsheviks took power in 1919, are infamous for their harrowing history of human suffering and brutal repression. Over the next 50 years, at least 1 million people lost their lives within the confines of these forced labor camps. The era of Joseph Stalin, a name synonymous with tyranny and terror, marked one of the darkest periods in the history of these institutions. During his reign, the wrong word or even a whisper of dissent could lead to a knock on the door in the dead of night, signifying the beginning of a nightmarish journey into the heart of a Soviet gulag. Historians estimate that nearly 14 million individuals found themselves condemned to these labor camps during Stalin's despotic rule. The prisoners were a heterogeneous group consisting of political dissidents who dared to speak out against the oppressive Soviet regime, common criminals and thieves, and even ordinary citizens who may have uttered an unkind word about a Soviet official. Beyond the borders of the Soviet Union, the Eastern Bloc of Europe saw its inhabitants shipped off to these work camps, effectively silencing opposition and erasing their cultural identity. Regardless of their origins, all Gulag inmates faced a grim destiny. They endured backbreaking labor in desolate, freezing locations, with scant protection from the elements and meager food rations. The photographs from this era capture the haunting essence of their ordeal, bearing testimony to the immense suffering that unfolded behind the barbed wire and watchtowers. The roots of this brutal system trace back to the Russian Empire, where the term katorga referred to a judicial ruling that exiled convicts to the Siberian wilderness. There, they were coerced into laboring on the region's underdeveloped infrastructure, a task so daunting that no one would willingly undertake it. However, it was under the government of Vladimir Lenin, in the wake of the 1917 October Revolution, that the Soviet Gulag system underwent a transformative expansion. Under Lenin's leadership, the Soviet regime deemed it necessary to rid Russia of dangerous ideologies and dissenting voices, all while capitalizing on free labor. They referred to this updated katorga system as a re-education campaign, where dissidents would, through the harsh rigors of labor, come to embrace the new communist order and respect the proletariat dictatorship. The term Gulag emerged as an acronym for Glavno Upravlenie Lagerai, or Main Camp Administration. Stalin's rapid expansion of the Gulag system was fueled by two driving forces. First, the Soviet Union desperately needed to industrialize, and the utilization of prison labor was instrumental in achieving this goal. Second, the Great Purge, also known as the Great Terror, was a brutal crackdown on dissent, both real and perceived, across the entire Soviet Union. Stalin's relentless pursuit of power led to the persecution of various groups, including party members, academics, kulaks, so-called rich peasants, and even those remotely connected to dissenters. During the Great Purge's darkest days, the mere act of being related to a dissident was enough to be suspected. In just 2 years, approximately 750,000 people were executed, while another million were condemned to the gulags, their lives forever entwined with the agonizing history of these wretched camps. Daily life in the USSR's forced labor camps was characterized by unrelenting brutality and misery. Prisoners endured starvation, and it's been reported that some resorted to hunting rats and wild dogs to secure any form of sustenance. This desperate hunt for food mirrored the prisoners' dire circumstances, where the meager rations they received barely kept them alive. The harsh conditions in the Russian Gulag system pushed inmates to the brink of human endurance. Outdated tools and primitive equipment were the norm, and inmates were subjected to relentless manual labor, often toiling until they literally dropped dead from exhaustion. Instead of relying on costly machinery, the Soviet authorities threw millions of men into backbreaking work using crude hammers and sheer force. These forced laborers contributed to colossal projects such as the Moscow-Volga Canal, the White Sea-Baltic Canal, and the infamous Kolyma Highway, known today as the Road of Bones. This haunting moniker stems from the grim reality that countless workers perished while constructing it, and their remains were incorporated into the road's foundation. The Soviet Gulag system made no exceptions for women, and many of them found themselves incarcerated due to the perceived transgressions of their husbands or fathers. Their experiences within the labor camps were some of the most heart-wrenching. Women were often housed separately from the men in barracks, but this segregation did little to protect them. Female prisoners became frequent victims of rape and violence, not only at the hands of fellow inmates, but also from the guards themselves. Many resorted to taking prison husbands as a survival strategy, offering sexual favors in exchange for protection or meager rations. For women with children, life in the Gulag was even more agonizing. They had to divide their already insufficient rations to feed their offspring, at times providing as little as 140 grams of bread per day. However, some women considered themselves fortunate if they were allowed to keep their children with them. In many cases, children were cruelly separated from their mothers and shipped off to distant orphanages. Tragically, the paperwork for these children was often lost or deliberately destroyed, making any future reunion virtually impossible. After Joseph Stalin's death in 1953, the zeal that had led to the imprisonment of thousands each year began to wane. Nikita Khrushchev, his successor, condemned many of Stalin's policies, resulting in the release of individuals imprisoned for petty crimes and political dissidents. By the time the last Soviet Gulag closed its gates, the system had exacted an unimaginable toll. Millions had lost their lives within its confines. Some had succumbed to their relentless labor, others had wasted away from starvation, and a grim fate awaited those who were simply taken into the woods and shot. Accurately counting the number of lives claimed by the gulags is a daunting task that may never yield a precise figure. Although Stalin's successors ruled with a somewhat lighter hand, the legacy of the gulags endured. Intellectual and cultural leaders had been decimated, and an atmosphere of fear continued to grip the population, a stark reminder of the horrors of this dark chapter in Soviet history. Rikers Island. The horrors of Rikers Island, one of New York City's most notorious and feared jails, have been vividly captured in the book Rikers: An Oral History by Graham Raymond and Reuven Blau. The authors delve into the grim reality of life on this nightmarish island, where those who are arrested and denied bail, or can't afford it, find themselves trapped in an environment characterized by tension, despair, and uncertainty. Rikers Island, situated in the East River, is a place where the city's most troubled and disenfranchised individuals are confined. This harsh, unforgiving environment takes its toll on both inmates and staff, leaving indelible scars on those who pass through its gates. The book explores various themes such as bullpen therapy, race, gangs, and mental health, offering a poignant and distressing portrayal of life on the island. What makes Rikers Island particularly unbearable is the unique combination of factors that contribute to its hellish reputation. It's an entire island dedicated to housing society's outcasts, and it's isolated from the city, accessible only via a narrow bridge. This isolation makes visiting the jail a challenge, with even paid lawyers often unwilling to make the trip. Furthermore, the facilities primarily consist of makeshift trailers intended for temporary use, featuring long, eerie hallways that seem to stretch endlessly. However, it's the general atmosphere of Rikers that truly affects the psyche. Its mythic reputation as one of the most dangerous places to be detained in America perpetuates a sense of perpetual dread and menace. The personal account of an individual who spent time on Rikers Island as a teenager paints a harrowing picture. Subject to violence and intimidation from other inmates, the young man learned to adopt a violent persona himself to survive in this volatile environment. The alarming state of Rikers Island, a notorious jail complex, has recently been highlighted through a music video and discussions on popular platforms like Drink Champs. The music video for NYC's Boldest by Tay 627 portrays the grim realities within Rikers, with inmates being subjected to violence, wielding homemade weapons, suffering head injuries, and even operating an illicit illicit weed store of sorts. This visual depiction of life inside the jail complex is a sobering reminder of the ongoing issues it faces. The video's release gained attention from Tony Yayo during his appearance on Drink Champs. His comments underscored the perception that the staff at Rikers struggles to maintain control, and the inmates, to a significant extent, govern the complex. The footage in the music video, particularly the portrayal of inmates running an underground weed market and possessing weapons, raises serious concerns about the deteriorating state of the facility. As Yayo pointed out, this situation has reinforced calls for the shutdown of Rikers Island, given the troubling conditions. Furthermore, a sequel to the music video was released, capturing additional disturbing images, such as flooded floors within the jail. These visuals serve as a poignant and alarming reminder of the harsh environment that both inmates and staff endure at Rikers. In 2021, New York representatives, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Jamal Bowman, Jerry Nadler, and Nydia Velázquez, called for the closure of Rikers Island due to its inhumane conditions and the gross mismanagement of federal funding. This call followed former New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio's prediction that Rikers would be closed within a decade, a promise that still remains unfulfilled. As the situation at Rikers Island continues to deteriorate, with 5 deaths reported in city custody this year and mounting concerns about the treatment of inmates, the urgency to shut down the facility grows. Federal Monitor Steve J. Martin's recent report has further highlighted the deep-seated issues within the city's jails, including the disturbing regression in Rikers, officers abandoning posts, security breaches, and the failure to seize weapons all point to a system in crisis. While the city officials have expressed their intent to close Rikers, the timeline for this closure remains uncertain. By law, Rikers Island must close by 2027, with plans to replace it with 4 smaller lockups spread across the boroughs. The challenge remains not just in acknowledging the need to close Rikers, but in implementing an effective plan to ensure the safety and well-being of inmates and staff in the interim. The continuing turmoil at Rikers Island underscores the urgency for comprehensive reform and closure, but the timeline and details of that process remain unclear. A former Rikers Island inmate, identified in court papers as Jane Doe, has reached a $1.2 million settlement with the city following her harrowing allegations of sexual abuse during her time at the Rose M. Singer Center. Jane Doe was initially sent to the facility in 2013 on a shoplifting charge. However, her nightmare began when correction officers discovered that she had previously worked as a confidential informant for the Department of Homeland Security. Upon her arrival, Doe claimed she was subjected to a litany of abuses, including being denied food and water, a non-consensual gynecological exam, and most shockingly, a brutal sexual assault that spanned several hours at the hands of 3 male guards. She was reportedly chained to a clogged toilet during this horrific incident, during which the officers used a flashlight to penetrate her, forced her to ingest soapy water, and sprayed pepper spray on her genitals and anus. Doe's ordeal did not end there. Despite managing to secure her release 6 days later with the help of a Homeland Security contact, she found herself back on Rikers Island in January 2014 on a credit card fraud charge, where she claims she was again sexually abused by correction officers. The case has been ongoing for nearly 5 years, and the recent settlement does not imply any admission of wrongdoing by the city or the other named defendants in the case. Doe's attorneys will receive a substantial portion of the settlement, with Doe herself receiving $250,000. District Judge Allison Nathan, who presided over the case, expressed strong criticism of the city in a December ruling. She argued that Doe had presented evidence of a policy of deliberate indifference to the physical and sexual assault of inmates at the Rose M. Singer Center. Furthermore, she stated that a juror could find that this indifference led to Jane Doe's sexual assault. According to the ruling, inmates at the Rose M. Singer Center report sexual assaults at twice the national average, and a report submitted for the case alleges that corrections officers escape justice for sexual assaults due to a code of silence among officers. While the settlement may provide some closure for Jane Doe, the deeply disturbing incidents that occurred at Rikers Island serve as a stark reminder of the challenges faced in ensuring the safety and well-being of incarcerated individuals within the corrections system. If you love watching videos like this, click on the video shown on your screen for more such interesting videos diving deep into the world of crime.